which is a bit shorter, by the way, and a bit lighter than the first one. Well, it depends. Maybe not. It's a bit lighter, yeah. So I'm just going to jump into it. Dear colleagues, at the beginning of this year, although to be fair, it seems as though it was a lot longer than the beginning of this year now, considering what we've all experienced over the past few months, I traveled to Djibouti in Africa. I had a job there, but I'm not going to speak to you about Djibouti. I'm going to speak to you about the country I traveled to after Djibouti for 2 weeks, and that is the lovely Ethiopia. Now, I didn't know very much about Ethiopia before I traveled there. And I still don't know tons about it, but I know a little bit more than I did. And I'm going to share the information that I've learned with you all this evening. We'll begin with the name. Ethiopia comes from Greek originally, and it means burnt faces. Just going to leave that one there with you. Ethiopia has a fascinating mix of history, of deep-rooted identity, of natural wonders, and indeed rare wildlife, all of which make the country a very intriguing place. Where can you find Ethiopia? Well, it's in the northeast of Africa, in what is known as the Horn of Africa. It borders Eritrea, which is in the north, Djibouti in the northeast, the de facto state of Somaliland and Somalia to the east, Kenya to the south, South Sudan to the west, and Sudan to the northwest. More than 100 million people live in Ethiopia, which makes it the most populated landlocked country on Earth. It also makes it the second most populated country in Africa. It has a total area of 1,100,000 squared kilometers. Its capital is Addis Ababa. It has an interesting and diverse landscape, which includes deserts, volcanoes, and highlands. Some things you maybe didn't know about Ethiopia. First of all, Ethiopia is one of 2 African countries that was never properly colonized by European nations. There was Italian occupation from the years 1936 to 1941, but there wasn't a lasting colonial administration in place. Indeed, many locals joke about this occupation, and they say in jest that, yes, we welcomed the Italians. They built infrastructure for us, they built hospitals, etc. for us, and then we kicked them out. During this occupation, Ethiopia was part of what was known as the African Oriental Italiana, which comprised Eritrea, Ethiopia, and Italian Somalia. But during that time, there were many passionate appeals to the international community from Ethiopians, which allowed Ethiopia to enter the League of Nations and to become the first African country on our planet to do so. They did this on the 30th of June, 1936. But we must remember that many European countries refused to recognize Ethiopia as an independent state and still classified it as an Italian colony. The UK and France, in particular, did this, and we can only ask ourselves, what interest did they have in doing that? So it wasn't until the 5th of May in 1941 that Ethiopia really became independent properly, internationally recognized. Another random fact on Ethiopia is that it is the second oldest, or rather it is the oldest independent sovereign state, in Africa. And many historians are in agreement on the fact that Ethiopia was one of the first places on Earth where we had human life. Human life is said to have existed in Ethiopia for millions of years. Coffee was also discovered in Ethiopia. Not everybody knows that. I didn't know that. It is the motherland of Arabica coffee. And it was discovered, it is claimed, in Kaffa in Ethiopia. Kaffa isn't that different from cafe or coffee. And It is said to have a regional flavor filled with aroma and beautiful taste, and I'm not a fan of it at all. That's only a part of what I have here. I brought back kilos of the stuff because it's absolutely delicious. And curiously, you'll see that the sizes are divided in Italian. This is familia. No prizes for guessing what that means. And here you have the description. Now, this is a staple. This is a national institution. This is considered some of the best coffee in Ethiopia. And you'll see that the description of the coffee is actually in Italian here, which is curious. Coffee is believed to have been cultivated in the Kaffa region since as early as the 9th century. Another crazy fact about Ethiopia is that 70% of all African mountains can be found in the country. Now, Africa's highest mountain is not found in Ethiopia, but it does have many, many mountains, and it is home to many, many rare species of flora and fauna. The Ethiopian calendar has 13 months. Now, most of us on this earth use the Gregorian calendar, which we're well aware comprises 365 days and 366 days in a leap year. But the Ethiopian calendar is a bit different. They use the Coptic calendar, which is made up of 13 months, 12 months of 30 days, and 13 months of 5 days. But this extra month comprises 6 days during leap years. The new year in Ethiopia falls on September 11th. It has done for a long time and bears no relation to other occurrences. Did you know that the Ark of the Covenant can be found in Ethiopia? You might be asking what on earth the Ark of the Covenant is. I was. It is said to contain two of the original tablets that Moses received from the man upstairs back in the day. But nobody has ever seen these tablets, so make of that what you will. Ethiopia is home to the first ever Olympian gold medalist from Africa. I'm not speaking about the original Olympics that took place in Olympia in Greece between 776 BC and 393 AD. I'm rather speaking about the Olympics that took place after a 1,503-year hiatus, modern-day Olympics in 1980 that began in 1896 in Athens, in Greece. They won a medal for long-distance running in 1960. Famously, the winner ran the race in his bare feet. Let's move over to diplomacy. Ethiopia is somewhat of a big shot in Africa. Its prestige on the world stage has allowed it to form deep relations with some major powers. Unsurprisingly, the United States and China are the biggest foreign investors in the country. The US gives the country the most aid and has strategic military alliances with the country, whereas China is the biggest importer of Ethiopian goods. The country has relations with both Israel and Palestine. And curiously, when the Israeli state was established, thousands of black Jews moved from Ethiopia to Israel. And today, there are more black Jews in Israel than there are in Ethiopia. The country has close ties with Turkey. This dates back to the Ottoman Empire. And it did have close ties with Russia. It experienced a communist little phase there for a while, but then it kind of grew out of it. And now relations aren't exactly warm, but they're not exactly cold either. It's a bit touch and go. Its BFFs, its best friends, are undoubtedly Egypt and Djibouti, and to a much lesser extent, Sudan. Egypt and Ethiopia have connections that go back to ancient history. A lot of this revolved around the fact that they both share the Nile Basin. Djibouti is the country's only way to the Red Sea, which plays, as you can imagine, a crucial role in trade for Ethiopia. So they're going to have to keep them sweet, because who knows what would happen if relationships were to go south. Sudan is the country's biggest oil provider. It's also a gateway to the Mediterranean for Ethiopia. And despite border conflicts, the two countries have relatively good relations today. Politically, unfortunately, Ethiopia is not extremely free. You may remember that there were protests towards the end of last year, and around 70 people died in these protests when protesters clashed with law enforcement. While I was there, personally, I wasn't able to use WhatsApp properly or any social media properly. I couldn't upload photos or videos, for example. But I could upload videos just before I left the country. And that just so happened to coincide with an African Union summit that was taking place in the capital just before I left, which drew people from all over the world leaders, press, you name it. So it just may have been a coincidence that I was able to upload media during that time, but I don't think it was. One of my good friends works for the UN in Addis Ababa, and she says that she has to use a VPN to send photos to me and to her friends around the world. I got to know a young trainee priest while I was in Lalibella, which is a very impressive UNESCO World Heritage Site in the country. I have pictures of both him and the beautiful church that you can see there in Lalibella. It's a very impressive structure. This man, Getu, has been writing to me recently and speaking about how concerned he is about the COVID-19 virus and what effects it will have on his country. He mentioned that right now, the people are supposed to be engaging in social distancing, but he sent me this photo last week of people at Mass. So it doesn't look as though they're paying much heed to government instructions, unfortunately. In conclusion, Ethiopia, like I said, is somewhat of a big deal in Africa. It's home to some of the earliest people ever recorded on our planet. It was home to some of the earliest ever communities and civilizations ever recorded on our planet. It's managed to avoid European colonization for the most part, and it indeed has a very vibrant and diverse society. One in which people from different backgrounds and different cultures come together and embrace a unique oneness, something that we all could learn from here in our union. Thank you.